Is my
Hello,
video on?
everybody. Yes, I think everybody can hear us now.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. For this MAGNiTT webinar, we are hosting Dana Baki, co-founder and COO of LunchOn. Dana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Taib, let's just dive in. So tell us about, so we're focusing on pivoting and survival strategies for startups. Tell us a little bit about where you were as LunchOn coming into COVID-19 and then sort of how that impacted you.
Sure. So I'm going to assume that most people don't know much about LunchOn and tell a little bit about our business and how what we were doing before and how we've shifted. So before COVID, we were focused on solving the problem of lunch at work. And that has been the problem we've been solving for, we're 4 years old now. And what we did was we basically offered a subscription model where you would pay 39 dirham a month, which is about $11. And then you would get your meals at about 25 dirham, which is a significant discount compared to the pricing that you would get from the restaurant or from any other delivery platform, right? So you'd be getting about a 40 to 50% discount on your meal and free delivery. And the way that we did that is that we would bundle orders by company and curate menus based off of the preferences of the employees in that company. So if you worked at IBM would see a menu that was curated based off of the preferences of IBM employees. They would see 3 restaurants a day and have 18 to 20 options to choose from in terms of items to meet all dietary restrictions. All of the meals would be at 25 dirham if they were subscribers. And if they weren't subscribers, they would be slightly higher. It would be about 35 dirham without delivery fees. And so we were very much focused on that lunch at work space because we knew that it was a huge opportunity that most delivery platforms weren't winning in. Our biggest competitor for that time is people bringing food from home or grabbing food from the supermarket downstairs or the coffee shop. And so it was a very different world pre-COVID where we were really focused on that problem. Now that everybody's working from home, we had a bit of an existential crisis at that point,
Obviously.
Right? So if you're focused on solving the problem of food at work and nobody's at work, how are you, what are you going to do? And so, we really went back to the basics and said, okay, our goal is to feed people, to get people affordable lunches that they love, and to give restaurants orders during their downtime, right? So those are the 2 things that, what our business is built off of. And so the first thing we said is if people are working from home, we need to start serving people in homes. And so, our team banded together and within a week, we basically made all of the product changes, all of the operational changes, all the user facing changes. And it's a lot of changes because the entire database was built off of companies and not residential buildings or, villas or anything like that.
Okay, well, let's wait before you go on. Let's break that down because I think there's something really interesting here that a lot of other founders can learn from, right? When we talk about we came into COVID-19 with some kind of market dynamics and a certain kind of demand trajectory. And then a lot of industries, we keep calling them affected industries, but that's getting sillier by the day because everybody is an affected industry, right? In some form. And so if you're talking about pivoting, right? Which you guys did, right? You were doing something and then the market said, nope, can't do this anymore. And you were like, okay, well, what do we do now, right?
Yeah.
How do we start thinking about that?
So it's a good question. I think what's really important is understanding what is your business built off of, right? So the market dynamics might change, user behavior might change, so many things, like everything changed now.
Yeah.
But you really need to go to the basics and understand, all right, so what is it that I'm offering? And what do I have? What are the assets or the strengths that I have and tools that I can work with to then figure out what role I now play in this new landscape. And so for us, what we did was we said, okay, what do we have? We have our restaurant relationships. We still want to be providing our restaurants with orders during their downtime and helping them get more profitable orders. So that's something that we still want to do. We know that we have users and that we have people that still need to eat
Yeah.
And that, with all the uncertainty, are still, are probably even more, financially driven right now, because, nobody knows what's going to happen, and
Exactly.
everyone is probably a bit anxious, right? So, we knew that our subscription model and offering could make a lot of sense for people that are trying to save money. And we had our mission, which is to be able to get people food, basically relieve a burden. So what, if you talk in our internal speak, we want to relieve people's burdens, and we don't want people to have to worry about getting lunch, and about being able to afford it, and all of those things. We want to bring the joy back into that. And so when we thought about it, we said, you know what, although a lot has changed,
Mhm.
and everything that we've been working on is now changing, we can still do those things, and we just need to do them differently.
So let's dive into, because you mentioned assets, right? So the assets of a startup are not necessarily traditional assets, right? I know
Right.
that you guys did something quite interesting with last mile delivery in Saudi. But for a lot of startups who might not necessarily have these physical assets that we're talking about, how do we think about those?
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's two different ways of thinking about assets. You mentioned Saudi. So I'll start with that one just so that people
Yeah.
understand a little bit, and then I'll talk about the UAE. So we're operational in the UAE and in Saudi. And our model is a bit different in each of them, because in Saudi, we have a delivery fleet there, whereas in the UAE, we rely on the restaurants and third party logistics partners to manage the delivery. So in Saudi, we were in a bit of a different place. So the market dynamic in Saudi was different than the UAE, just generally, but also we had this fleet. And so for us, it was an additional concern for us, because we had these people that we didn't want to lose, a
Yeah.
fleet of over 100 drivers that we didn't want to lose. And we take our responsibility to our team, the people that we employ, the families that are reliant on us, very seriously. And we said,
Yeah.
we don't want to leave these drivers um, without a job. And so we thought, okay, so how can we use, if we can't deliver food, because right now, for example, in Saudi, there's no food delivery. And so if we can't deliver food, what can we use these drivers for instead?
Yes.
And so we're now using those drivers to do other sorts of deliveries, and monetizing the drivers in that way, and enabling them to not, and it's actually probably a little bit better for the drivers, because now we're able to use them throughout the day rather than just
Just
for
at
our
lunchtime.
food deliveries, right? And so that's a huge pivot, because it's not even related to food,
Yes.
at the end of the day. So that was, a more traditional view of how to use your assets. Like, what do you have? But in the UAE, we had to think a little bit more creatively, because we don't have. On the one hand, it's great. We don't have any assets, right? Like, there's no cap. It's not a capital intensive business.
But on the other
Um,
hand,
but on the other hand,
we
you're
don't have
like,
any
okay, well,
assets.
we've been working for years. What are our assets? Um, and so really the assets that we have are our technology.
Mhm.
Over half of our team is engineers, right? So we have a very strong tech platform. We have our team, we have our restaurant relationships, we had our current user database.
صح.
So those sorts of things that are what we knew we had as tools. They're not traditional assets, but they're tools. And we're a part in figuring out what the strategy would be moving forward.
So, I'm glad you mentioned strategy, because this is the next conversation. Is in a startup, sometimes you are not making decisions unilaterally, right? You need to
Mhm.
involve your founder, your co-founders, your team, your senior management, oftentimes your investors. So right now, for those people that are that are having these big strategy discussions where they're thinking about potentially doing something completely new, um,
Mhm.
these conversations can be challenging. So how do you suggest that people start going about those conversations?
So, I mean,
What
I
did you
think
guys
that,
do?
what did we do? Okay, so for us, we have a very supportive investor network,
Hmm.
and I have to give it to our investors. We're blessed; they were the first ones to reach out to us and say, what's happening? How can we help? What are you guys thinking? And really, they were sounding boards for us. And so to be fair, we didn't come to them with like, we have no idea. Like you have to have a plan, right? You have to have
Yeah.
a general idea of what your options are, and at least come to the table with, here are our assets, here are the tools that we have, this is what's happening, here are some options, and have them help you think through those things, give you more ideas, build off of others. I mean, when we built those things, and we had a board meeting at the
These
time.
plans, right? These contingencies.
Yeah, so we had a lot of different, we said we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. Here are the pros, here are the cons. And we went into that, and we said, this is what we would recommend,
Right.
given all of this. But we want to hear from you. And so we took it to the board.
Right.
And we had a great conversation with the board. They had some great points. They helped build on some things. They helped us. We ultimately moved forward with what we were recommending, but with their additional input into it that made it a lot stronger. And it wasn't only the board. I have investors that are contacting me on a daily basis with like, hey, have you heard of this? Or do you know this? Or what's happening with this? And so, keeping them engaged is important, because listen, they are eyes and ears. You live in your bubble, and you know what's happening in your bubble, and having people that actually have a vested interest in the business, that are thinking with you, and that can see things in different countries and different businesses, can really help. And so, I really enjoy our conversations with our investors, because they help us think through things differently.
So let's talk about thinking things through, right? What we've been seeing a lot of these, especially on LinkedIn, we've been seeing a lot of different ways to do contingency planning, right? From the very, very simple to the increasingly complex, right? With all of these very complicated matrices. Can we boil that down to the essentials? What does contingency planning and like preparing for different scenarios actually mean, and when we strip that down to the basics?
Yeah. Okay. So like, this is not I've not thought through this model in any way, but this is how I this is how I would tackle it. If you're going back to the basics,
Yeah.
I would be breaking it down on contingency for revenue and contingency for costs.
Okay.
Right. At the end of the day, we're talking about businesses here, that need to be able to be sustainable at some point.
Yeah.
And so that's how I would be thinking about it, to say, okay, what's happening with revenue right now? Is it, you might not be able to generate revenue at all given the situation, or has it just dipped, or has it increased, or whatever it is, right? What's been happening to your revenue? And what are the different scenarios that come out of that, right? So, if, for us, for example, a month ago, we said, okay, people are slowly moving to work from home. But it wasn't like overnight that everyone worked from home. We just saw it happening as a trend. And companies were slowly sending their employees home. How the government was doing more slow. So we said, okay, if this continues, if we start seeing people working from home more and more often, what's that going to mean for our revenue? And what do we then need to do in terms of continuing to serve people and continuing to be able to generate revenue? And that, what that boils down to is, what is your product offering at the end of the day, right? So what are you able to offer? Is your product offering perfect for this scenario, in which case there's not much revenue risk, right? Yeah. Or is there risk involved to that? And how may you need to shift your offering, to meet the current need, right? So we're currently thinking about things like, okay, not only are we serving people in residences, but you know what? We used to be serving individuals, and now people are ordering for families.
Which is a different proposition.
Do they want to eat the same things? Probably not, right? So we're still continuously thinking through what's the product offering, and how do we contingency plan for our revenue.
Right.
So that's the first piece. I think the second piece is on cost. And you need your cost structure to match your revenue structure. So, we were built for significantly more orders than we're doing today, right? And so we said, all right, we don't know how long this is going to last. Our team is our most important asset, so we don't want to lose anyone from our team. But how can we utilize them better to be able to get more revenue, right? To really be pushing on the revenue piece, and contingency plan. If we cannot generate more revenue for whatever reason, what does that mean in terms of the team, If because the team is the biggest cost for us, at least. Other people might be different. And then other costs, thinking through. So, for example, marketing, we cut that down 80%. We said this is not the time to be doing marketing, like until we have our product offering set. So we basically looked at everything that has to do with our costing and said, okay, what can we take? What can we cut very easily, and what should we contingency plan?
Yes.
And so I think when you break, at least for us, that's when we broke it down that way, it was easier for us to plan.
Right. Okay. Well, let me ask you a question on team specifically, right? Because this is worth its own webinar, and we have MAGNiTT have done like 2 webinars so far. But here's a really good question I think that you would be able to shed some light on. So we're talking now about creating contingencies and making sure that our costs and our revenues make sense, right? When you look at them together. And team is obviously one of your biggest expenses for many startups. How do you make sure that you're not making rash decisions now that address short-term problems that ultimately set you up for either bigger challenges later on when we go back to whatever the new normal is, or that effectively set you up for failure? Because if you let go of a lot of your team now, it's going to be very, very difficult to rehire people 6 months down the line, right?
Yeah. This is one of the hardest things that we've had to grapple with, honestly, because we value our team so much, and it's really, we wouldn't be able to achieve anything without our team. So we don't take them for granted at all, and our team is so passionate and dedicated about what we're doing that this was a really tough one for us. The way that we've thought about it is that, one, let's assess what are the short-term risks and the long-term risks. And, this situation could be lasting a long time, but there are probably more short-term risks that we are more aware of than long-term risks.
Yeah.
And so, I would assess that to say, okay, in the short term, given the risks, what are the implications from a cost standpoint? Like, how much do I really need to cut in the short term? And then in the long term, given different scenarios, what may we need to cut? And so we really did that exercise to say, okay, given what we believe we'll be able to achieve from a revenue standpoint, what do we really need to cut from a cost standpoint? Let's forget the who it would impact for a second. And let's say, okay, you know what? We really need to cut our costs by 40% for this to make sense, because we can't just have a huge cost structure with no revenue.
It doesn't justify it.
And so if we need to cut our costs by 40%, what does that mean for the poor people, right? So, for us, we're thinking of it as a gradual process. We don't want to let anybody go, because we don't know when this could turn around, and we really don't want to let people go. The human aspect of this has been so important to us.
Yes.
So what way we did it is we said, okay, let's look at everyone. Let's see, is there work right now? Are people really busy? And some people are still very busy. Or are some people just naturally not that busy given the function that they're in, right? So, like if you're, I don't want to put any type of position on the blast, but if your position is just one that doesn't have much work right now,
as a function of what we're in rather than the person or anything, I understand.
Exactly. So if that's what's happening, then you're in somewhat of a different position, unfortunately, than someone that is working at 100% and has a lot of work right now. So what we've said is, okay, let's look at these functions that don't have as much work right now, and say, we want to keep these people and utilize them in other ways. So, if your sales function unfortunately doesn't have much work right now, how can we use the sales function in other ways, right? Yeah. So how can we put people in different places?
Reorganize, basically, with kind of the assets that you have, but looking at your team as those assets.
Yes. So first we reorganized. Then after reorganizing, we said, okay, now that we've reorganized, are they busy? Is everybody still busy? Okay, if everybody is not busy, then let's look at what's happening and say, okay, how can we, these people are probably working 60% of the time, or 50 or 70 or whatever percent of the time.
Sure.
We don't want to cut their salaries. But instead we'll say, okay, instead of working 5 days a week, please work 4 days a week and you'll get paid 80%.
صح.
Okay. So that they're still getting paid full salary for the time that we need them. And if things ramp up, great,
Then we
we'll
come
get
back.
100%.
Exactly.
Right. So we're proportionally adjusting in that way based off of that. Then you say, okay, you take a look and you say, okay, did that do enough for how much I need to save? If that wasn't enough, then we've looked at cutting across the board, everybody, and saying, we don't want to let anyone go. We'd rather have everyone take a small cut and keep everyone that we can,
Yeah.
rather than, pick and choose the people that we want to keep. And, our team has been super understanding and said, nobody wants anybody to get to be let go, and said, we
Yeah.
understand. And so, that's something that we've rolled out across. And everyone's been very understanding because we've also been very transparent.
Yes.
Where we don't want anybody worrying about, if they're going to lose their job or what's going to happen. And we've been very transparent on what's happening on the business and what's happening based off of our cost structure and
With
how we're thinking.
all your team members? So is this across the organization? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's just one of our values.
Yeah.
So we're very transparent. And we found that helps people feel passionate and motivated.
Of course.
And they don't have to worry, and they know what their leadership is thinking. So that's how we've done it. I think generally I would say it should be a gradual approach, because you don't know what's going to happen. Listen, sometimes it's do or die.
Yes.
We weren't in that position, alhamdulillah, but some business may be, and that's a really unfortunate situation that you're in. And sometimes you can't do it gradually, and
صح.
people will understand. And so, you do need to make quick decisions sometimes. But if you're not in that position, then I would say try to do it gradually with, people in mind, and, see how things evolve.
Right. So I was actually going to ask you a question about how you motivate teams, but actually somebody's asked exactly this question, so we can address that in the Q&A, because there's a few more questions I want to get through. Obviously, there's a very, very big question for many tech startups, which is, what is the role of fundraising right now? Right?
Okay.
So, and again, a whole series of webinars could take place on the landscape of fundraising right now. We've just published an article, a really extensive overview about it. So we know from multiple sources that we could potentially see less transactions moving forwards. We've already seen a drop in deals, less money, more risk-averse investors, dips in valuation, etc., etc. So if you were initially planning, if pre-COVID-19, you had been planning to fundraise around this time, what's the advice there, Dana?
So, as you said, the fundraising landscape has really changed, and I think investors are going to be thinking about very different types of metrics now than they were, a couple of months ago. So a few months ago, you might have been asked a lot of questions about growth.
Yes.
And probably less questions about profitability. I think there's always questions about, is there a path to profitability? But, I think generally investors understand that when you're in growth mode, there's investment that needs to go in and such.
Yeah.
I think now they're going to be very much more focused on, do you have a solid contingency plan for revenue standpoint? Right. I think that's going to be a really important thing that people are going to need to sell in, to say, no matter what happens, we have a business, right? So if you're coming in, and it goes either way, because even if you're coming in and saying, and I hope I'm not targeting anyone, but like I'm thinking about today's landscape. Like if you were planning on launching an app based off of like work productivity for working at home, right? Like if that's what you were doing, as an investor, if I were an investor, I would say, okay, but what if people go back to the office? Like you lost your business, right? So your business model, your revenue model really needs to be one that is airtight, that you can say, if this happens, this is what we're doing. If this happens, this is what we're doing. This is how we would monetize in any way. And this is how, this is why we have a solid business. And I think that's where I think that's one place that investors will poke a lot of holes in. I think the other place is on your unit economics,
Yeah.
and your profitability, right? So I don't think they're going to expect people to be profitable like this, right? But they are going to be looking at how much are you spending and how are you thinking about your unit economics and how far away are you from being gross margin positive, net margin positive, overall, like all of those things. So you really need to have those numbers like in the back of your hand.
So
You need
let
to
me
know.
ask you a slightly more difficult question. Do you think it would
Yeah.
be fair to say that kind of investor perspectives, without, I mean, generalizing a little bit, are shifting from kind of the growth at all costs model potentially to a focus on unit economics, profitability, etc.? And is that a sustainable and like change that we will see continuing?
Yes. So listen, I don't want to talk for all investors because I think every investor
صح.
in VC is going to have a different perspective on things. So it's going to depend on who you're talking to. Um, I think investors are going to want to, and no matter what, investors are going to want to invest in solid entrepreneurs that have solid businesses.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how they define solid business is what's going to potentially change. Is unit economics and profitability going to become more important? Definitely in the short term. I think
Yes.
it will. A year from now, I don't know where the landscape is going to be, but if you're planning on fundraising in the next 3 months, definitely it's going to be something that they're going to be thinking about more. Um, doesn't mean you need to be profitable today. It just means that it needs to be very realistic that you will be profitable
At some
within the
point.
foreseeable, yeah. Within, it can't be that within 5 years we'll be profitable if all of these
And
things
8
happen.
rounds of funding, and yeah. Okay, where are the areas, Dana, that you are seeing kind of increased consumer demand in now, the industries that are kind of flourishing as a function of where we are? And do you think that in those specific industries that's going to be sustainable? Well, it's just going to be an outlier whenever we go back to normal.
um, okay, so listen, I'm not an industry expert, so it's a tough one. I think what I
We
would
won't
say
hold
is,
you to it.
yeah. um, Listen, there are basic needs that are always going to be basic needs, right? So food is going to be a basic need, healthcare is going to be a basic need, education is going to be a basic need. So like there are needs like that that are always going to happen, and always going to be there. You would have said in the past that transportation is a basic need. You would have said that.
That's
Now,
a little bit
now
different.
that's put into question a little bit. I think that will continue to be a basic need because really I don't think people are going to be stranded in their houses forever. So I believe transportation will continue to be a basic
I
need,
hope so.
but the product offering will need to change or will need to be modified, right? So I think there will continue to be these basic needs. And if I were thinking about what to do within those spaces, I would say, how has people's needs in those spaces evolved, right? So
Yes.
for food, what's happened? People might be more price sensitive. People are cooking more. People are ordering for their families rather than individually. Like those sorts of things may have happened. Education is, people are homeschooling. I don't know, like that sort of thing. You have what else did I say was a basic need? I don't know.
No.
Whatever. That sort of thing, I would look at how have they evolved and what are the current need, like what are the new needs and what happens to those needs if things change, right? So okay, homeschooling is a current need, for example. That's really a big need right now.
That's one that's close to your heart, huh?
Yeah, definitely. So that's a big need right now, but in 6 months or a year, is it going to be a big need? I have no idea, right? So if I were thinking about education, personally, I wouldn't want to be building a business around homeschooling in particular, although it's the big need right now. I don't know what's going to happen to that need in the future. So instead, I would be thinking about, is it around empowering parents to educate their children, alongside teachers and at home? Is it about, I'm just making this up, but like,
Yeah.
okay, Arabic, if Arabic is a big need to teach in the home, and that's a very difficult thing to teach in the home, and it's very difficult to teach in schools as well. Like, there's some sort of way to create something to help with
solve
that.
for that.
Yeah. So I would make sure that whatever you're building is going to work no matter what happens in the landscape.
So actually, I have one more question before we turn over to the audience, because I see already we have 7 questions. So here's a difficult one, right? When do you know that it's time to pull the plug on this particular venture?
When do you know? So, okay, I think there needs to be product market fit, and you need to be able to get that answer on, do I have a product that people want? And you should be able to pivot and test and pivot and test and pivot and test and pivot and test. And hopefully you get to a point where you do find something that people need and want.
Right.
But if after, I don't know how many pivots, and you've run out of cash, basically, at that point, I think you need to reassess, am I really solving a problem? And I think that's kind of the question that people need to be really realistic about is, am I actually solving a problem with my product offering? And if I'm not, is there a different problem that I can be solving? And so, as an entrepreneur, I would want to say, you should always try to pivot, like try to find something else and try to find something. Like, I don't ever want to tell someone like, okay, man, it's time
to try something new.
Yeah, like, the reality of the entrepreneurial journey is that there's a lot of ups and downs, and where you start and where you finish is never the same place. And, so many things that you're going to try are going to fail. So I would never want to say, if something you've tried fails, you should pull the plug, because that's just not true. You really should continue to try different things as much as possible, and test and learn. I think that's the biggest thing, is don't build something out until it's 100% what you want it to and then test it, because at that point you've invested so much into something that may not be something people want. So try to test things as quickly as you can and at as little cost as you can. It may not be perfect, but done is better than perfect, right? So get some data, get something that can show whether you're in the right direction or the wrong direction, and try to iterate as much as possible. So, I think that would be more my advice. I mean, at that point, you pull the plug if you really have no more ideas, where you're convinced that there's no problem that you're solving, and you don't have money to basically sustain it or convince someone else that you have a product that is worth investing in.
Okay, Dana, are you ready for our audience questions that are pouring in at the moment? Okay, so the first one is actually a question that I had planned to ask. What kinds of strategies are you using to motivate your teams remotely in COVID-19?
Okay, so it's working remotely is tough, and what we try to do is we talk to each other a lot, right? So we have a lot of meetings. When we were in the office, sometimes I'd be like, guys, let's minimize the meetings, 15-minute meetings, like let's be more productive. But now, it actually helps to have a lot of meetings, because you can remain connected.
Stay connected.
Exactly. And so I try to say, hey, can we jump on a call to discuss this? Let's schedule a meeting to do this. Like, I try not to have, of course, if a conversation can be had over Slack or something quickly, then it should be done that way. But I think that engaging people in meetings and having them be a part of those meetings really helps them understand what's happening. And so I think that's one.
Do you ask them to keep video on? Sorry.
So for some meetings, yeah. So for some meetings, we keep video on. And I think there's a few different types of meetings we try to have. So one, we have a standing meeting every day with everybody.
Right.
So just quick updates, what's happening, everybody's on it. And we basically are re-looping every day on the status of everything. And that's kind of like a refresher for everyone. Like, hey, how's your day? Like, what's happening? Da, da, da. So that's a standing meeting every day. We then have our weekly team meeting where we're basically giving them an update on what's been happening. Although people have visibility on what's been happening because they have the standing meetings, we like basically do a strategy reloop. Like, okay, guys, this is what's happening. Given this, this is what we need to be focusing on, and basically get everybody re-engaged on what are the top things we need to be focused on in the next week, and how are we thinking about it as the leadership of the company.
Okay.
So we're doing that. And then I think the like my general the thing that I do is I'm really transparent with people on how things are going. So I loop people in more so than I need to in these scenarios. So if we're having a call about something, I'll invite people that I wouldn't necessarily feel like need to be in that meeting, but I want them to know what's happening and I want them to hear what's going on. And so just as much transparency as possible. And then, loop them into the vision. I think, when you're having those daily calls or weekly calls, you really need to inspire them and make them see what you're working towards. Because if they're just looking at the numbers, it can be really demotivating, right?
Yes.
And so you need to show them like, guys, the fact that we've pivoted and we've pivoted so quickly, that's just enormous. Like that's a huge accomplishment. And we've opened doors that are going to be open to us past COVID. And this is why it's such a big deal. And this is why it's so big. And, we're focusing in these places because it's important for X, Y, and Z. And, we've done really well here, but we really need to improve here. And I think we can do it because of this, this, and this. And so, you need to be very honest and transparent, but you also, you can't be doom and gloom. You might be really stressed out about the situation, but I've said this before, the founder journey is a very lonely one where, you can't put your stress on others. Like you really need to be that energizing force for your team to and have that passion to say, guys, we're going to get through this. And, we have all of these things going for us and this is how we're going to do it. And one step at a time, and we're going to do it together. But I really believe we can. And inside you might be really stressed and you might be saying, I don't know if we're going to get through this, but you need to believe that you are and really push your team to believe.
So we have a couple more questions and we're going to have to answer them a little bit quickly just because we've got so many to get through before our time runs out. So this one's a really good one from Antoine. In terms of wage cuts, do you recognize this as a temporary cut without later compensation, or do you promise compensation later down the line for your team?
We haven't promised anything later because I don't like to promise things that I can't,
that you don't know
on. So what we've said is, unfortunately, this is the state of the world and the state of the company, and this is the best we can do for now. And people generally, I think, lots of companies are laying off. Lots of people are. I think people will appreciate the fact that you're trying to cut as little as possible.
Yes.
And listen, if the company is in a different place in a year, you always have the freedom to make up for it later. But given the uncertainty, personally, I wouldn't promise something that I don't know if I can deliver on.
Under what circumstances would you let people go?
So one, if they're not performing, you can always let someone go.
And that's not a COVID thing, right? That's an organizational thing.
Exactly. So performance is always very important. What circumstances would you let someone go? I mean, if they're not able to contribute, so maybe it's not a performance issue. Maybe they're great, but they're not able to contribute right now. I would first put them on unpaid leave if I could. So before letting them go, I'd say, this is this really strong person that I really want them to be on my team, but
there's
I don't
no
know
fit right now.
I would put them on unpaid leave before I let them go, if possible. And I would have a transparent discussion with them and say, hey, I love you. I want you to be on our team. I don't know what's going to happen. I understand that, you have your life and you have to support yourself in whatever way. If you end up finding another job and moving on, I understand, but I hope you understand where the company is. And I truly hope this passes quickly and that you're able to join us again.
So, I mean, I'm noticing a lot of these questions are about team and motivation and management. And here's another one kind of focused on managing teams remotely. So companies used to use attendance as their metric to be constructive every day. How do you measure, what measure are you using to keep track almost of your employees and their productivity?
So this is something that every manager needs to be managing for his or her team. Like, I don't know what everybody in the organization is doing at any given
You
point,
probably
right?
don't have time to.
I don't have time to, and I'm not working as closely with every person to be able to do that. So what I've asked my team to do is, hey, you need to know what every person on your team is doing every day, right? So you need to be checking in. I can't check in with every person on the team, but you need to be checking in with everybody that reports to you every day, basically, to be like, hey, what's going on? What's happening? What's the update, etc. Right? So I think once you have that, like the pyramid, basically,
Yes.
you have those conversations. So I can now go to any manager on my team and say, hey, what's this person working on? Are they busy? Are they not busy? What's happening? Can we use them somewhere else? And they'll say, oh, they're super busy working on this, or actually they're not, whatever it is. So I think that's something that you have to have your team doing for everyone that reports into them. And anyone that's reporting into me, I'm doing that.
Yeah. So there's here's a question in the chat. There's a risk of the UAE and KSA going on full lockdown with no deliveries. How are you preparing for that?
That's like our worst nightmare, honestly, if that were to happen. If they were to stop all food deliveries, that would impact a lot more than just LunchOn, right? So
Yes.
it would impact all of the delivery players, and it would depend. Like, it could impact restaurants, but not grocery delivery. If it, we're looking at things like groceries, like helping people get groceries and prepped meals and that sort of thing to their homes. So we're already looking at things outside of restaurant deliveries. Um, they could stop all deliveries altogether. In which case, I don't think that that's sustainable for very long. So if they were to say no grocery deliveries, no food deliveries, nothing, that's not a several month thing,
No.
that can change, right? So, I would have to believe that would be a few weeks, a few really tough weeks for us that we'd have to manage. But we would then use that time to say, okay, when they open up, have we expanded our product offering the way that we need it to be to ramp up? So, when they open up again, people are still going to need groceries. They're still going to be doing, like, have we worked on our restaurant supply, our grocery supply, our everything to be ready when they open things up? It's a reality. It might happen. If it happens in Saudi, who knows? But, those sort of like really drastic measures, hopefully won't be long lived.
Right. So are you still using digital marketing for LunchOn?
We've just cut our digital marketing significantly. So we still do market, but just at a much lower rate than we were before.
Are you guys working above break even, or will you be trying new things as LunchOn, like working on a new model perhaps, from an anonymous attendee?
So what do you mean by break even?
I guess the question is around, are you guys working above the break even line as LunchOn yourselves?
Like, are we profitable?
Yeah.
I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not going to answer questions about our unit economics, but we take our unit economics very, very, very seriously. So it's something that we've taken very seriously before COVID. And that has actually been something really important in all of the fundraising that we've done. So, we're in a good place, fortunately.
So here's a kind of more existential question, right? Do you intend to keep the current practices that you guys are implementing now at LunchOn during COVID-19? Are you considering them temporary, or do you plan on continuing them potentially? What are you taking into the new normal?
So you mean from our product offering, or just from everything?
No, from like how you're managing LunchOn.
Okay. So, I mean, for us, the product offering piece is one that we view as something that would exist even past. So even if everybody goes back to work, which they will at some point, when people go back to work, we're still going to want to serve people in their homes. Because, some people will continue to work from home and people still want dinner, and that sort of thing. So we're viewing it as something that will continue past COVID. And we view it as a great way that, as an opportunity to, like, how we have expanded our business now to serve more people in more places in more ways. So that will continue. I think our focus on unit economics and profitability will continue. I think that's not a short-term thing that people are going to need to do. That's definitely longer term. So that will continue. Um, and then, how we're managing our teams, you know, I hope we're not working from home forever. That was a huge part of our culture. So I hope that's not something we have to keep, but it may be. And, we'll keep managing it the best we can.
So just final question, because we're almost out of time. What are the best things about COVID-19 for you that you've experienced as a founder?
I think it's made us not take anything for granted. We were in a completely different mindset 2 months ago, just such a different mindset. And it makes you go back to the basics, right?
Yeah.
And so just, I think generally it's made the world realize how fragile everything is and how everything can just change overnight. And so, this has impacted startups and large corporations and everybody, right? So I think the positive piece of it is it's made everyone think back to how do you make the fundamentals stronger?
Right, back to basics.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. I don't think it's going to be an easy answer for anybody, because even the people that are really profiting from this situation right now, the situation is going to change in 6 months and in a year and et cetera. So, everyone needs to go back to basics. Nobody can bank on the situation being as it is today, because the situation next month might be different and next year will be different. And so you really need to be thinking about everything more holistically.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us on this MAGNiTT webinar. It was such a pleasure to have you. There are a few questions that we weren't able to answer, so if anybody just wants to leave them as comments, we can send them to Dana afterwards and make sure that she can answer those. Thank you.
Helpful. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Yalla. Bye.
Bye.